Welcome back to the kitchen at Andersen Acres. Today we're going to be making honey oat bread. This is a really tasty one. It makes great toast and it's great with peanut butter and jam. So let's get started. The recipes are really easy. So you just do your normal 1 cup of water. No big deal. Just 1 cup. You're going to do a teaspoon of salt. I'm using Himalayan salt and I am adding everything to my bread maker because we're going to make the dough in the bread maker. We will come back and shape the dough ourselves because I don't like baking in the bread maker. Now this is honey oat bread, so we are going to need honey. I do not like to muck up my measuring spoons and that with honey because it's annoying. So I'm literally just going to squeeze about a tablespoon. You can eyeball it. If you go a little over, that's okay because it's just honey. I might add a little more honey in a minute. I'll decide as I go. It doesn't really matter that much. So you also want 2/3 of a cup of oats. Okay, so 2/3 of a cup. And you need the oats because it's honey oat bread. Without the oats, you're really not getting very far because then it's not oats. I'm going to add a little more honey just because I'm deciding I kind of want it honeyed. So I'm probably doing 1.5 tablespoons, but 1 tablespoon is plenty sufficient. Because we're using the honey, we do not need any kind of sugar, okay? Because the honey is plenty of sugar. We are also going to do 2 2/3 of a cup of flour. Normally it would be 3 cups of flour, but the oats will absorb some of the water, so you don't need quite as much flour. Then we are going to do a heaping teaspoon of yeast. This is bread machine yeast. You can use quick rise as well in a bread maker. If you're going to do this by hand, you would of course use traditional yeast and dissolve it in warm water before you start. If you're interested in doing it by hand, refer to my video. I will link to it in the description about rolling dough by hand. It's really very easy. But for now, we're going to pop this in the bread maker. My bread maker takes about 1.5 hours to mix it, knead it, and do the first rise. So we'll come back in 1.5 hours to our dough. If you're doing it by hand, again, you're going to have to let that first rise happen on your own. The bread maker won't do it because you're not using a bread maker. So we're going to pop it in the bread maker. You don't have to. You can do it by hand. Back in about 1.5 hours. All right, so we are back. Our honey oat dough is nicely formed. It's looking good. It should feel pretty damp, but not sticky. Okay, if it's not a little bit damp, you're going to want to roll it out with a little bit of water on your hands to kind of dampen it. So it's damp, but it's not sticking to my hands. So now we're just going to shape it into a loaf. We're going to not make it too long and skinny, but we're also not going to try to put it in a bread pan. This particular dough works best if we kind of do not a baguette, that's long and skinny, but if we just kind of do a nice fat loaf that we don't use a bread pan for. So we're just going to roll this out. That looks about good. If you feel any air bubbles, you want to squish them. So if you feel something wiggly back and forth inside, that means there's an air bubble trapped. So squish those air bubbles. There we go. I got it. There was an air bubble there. So you just want to make sure it's mostly equal size throughout. Okay, make sure any seam is pinched because you don't want it coming apart on you. Okay, looking good. Pinchy. And I'm probably going to put it this side up just because I like the way that side looks. So we are going to put it on, again, the cookie sheet that I use for pretty much everything. This has been in a lot of videos. And we're going to take about 1 tablespoon of cornmeal and just start sprinkling it where you're going to lay the loaf. And you're not going to use the full tablespoon, but it's good to have a little bowl of cornmeal. So you're just going to sprinkle that cornmeal, a good layer, because one, you don't want it sticking. Now it's not going to stick to this liner because this is one of those copper liners. Nothing sticks to it. But it gives you a nice texture on the bottom of the loaf. So a little bit of cornmeal goes a long way. So we're just going to put some cornmeal on here. And then we're just going to take that and lay that on there. Now we're not going to rotate it now because obviously there's cornmeal on the bottom. So now we're just going to set that aside to rise. It's going to need about 1 hour, 15 minutes maybe to rise up because it has the oat, so that retards the rising a little bit. So you're going to have to give it a little bit of time. You want it to get a little bit fatter, not quite double in size is fine. because it may not want to double in size. That happens when you have the oat in it. But this will be quite tasty, and we'll stick that aside. If you're going to put it on your countertop, you want to cover it with a damp tea towel. I'm going to put mine in the microwave, so I don't need to use a damp tea towel because the microwave keeps heat and humidity in. But if you do not have somewhere like a microwave to put it, cover it with a damp tea towel so that you keep in that moisture and the heat that it produces as it's rising, because you do want it to rise up nice and fluffy. We'll come back in about an hour 15 minutes and see how it's risen. So our bread has risen up nice and fluffy. You can see it has indeed doubled in size. It did take a little longer than breads without oats, but that's okay. We're willing to wait for a good bread. It's looking fantastic. Now we are not going to coat it with anything. Part of the beauty of this bread is the texture of the oats, so I don't want to coat it with milk or water or an egg wash because you can see the oats on the surface as well as inside the bread. I want that texture, so we're just going to put it in the oven as is. You want to cook it at 375 for about 25 minutes. That's usually perfect. So we'll come back in 25 minutes, we'll stick it in the oven at 375, and we'll see how it's done. And there we have it, a completed honey oat bread. You can see the cornmeal on the bottom, and it is just delicious. It's nice and golden, so it is perfect. You're going to want to wait about 20 minutes before you slice it, just to let it finish cooking inside and to let it set a little bit, just because you don't want it collapsing on you. But after 20 minutes, slice and enjoy. I hope you decide to make honey oat bread for yourself. Thanks for joining us today. If you'd like to see more of our videos, please like and subscribe so that we can keep baking for you. See you tomorrow.